When I was a sophomore in college, I was invited to spend some time at a friend's farmhouse outside of Reading, Pennsylvania. I went there often to get away from college life and enjoy the countryside, having been born in it. The house itself was an old farmhouse said to be 150 years old, with the questionable spooky stories of supposed previous owners. It was also situated way out in the country in isolation. My best friend Wally owned the house and invited me there for as long as was necessary to study for my midterm exams. Shortly after my arrival, though, the place began to fill up with people and became just another party night instead of one of solitude. Wally's innumerable friends just stopped by and were composed of various musicians who loved to jam, drums and all. The music was great and the old farmhouse was dancing to the drum beat. While I was there to take advantage of the quiet, let's just say there wasn't going to be any. I set out to study upstairs anyway. The subject matter was grueling and the music downstairs was enticing. After a few hours, Wally and his friends came up and told me it was time to relax, right now. I convinced them it was unnecessary to carry me, that they should put me down and I would follow their lead. Their form of relaxation involved many shots of tequila with salt and lemon, lined up and ready for me. There was lots of friendly laughter at my expense, but I got away with only 2 shots of tequila and demands for many more. I listened to the music for a while, noting that people were there that I did not recognize. They weren't the usual farm visitors and were not smiling type. One guy had a penetrating stare aimed at me. I privately asked around, but no one was acquainted with them. His look left me feeling uncomfortable, so I left. I went back upstairs to study, or try to study. When it became apparent that I would not be studying due to the noise, I gave up and fell asleep. I began dreaming. I've always been a bit of a lucid dreamer, always remembering my dreams in color. In the past, my dreams were like musicals, fun and positive. I know, corny, but I rarely had a bad dream, let alone a nightmare. This dream started out okay, but it eventually began to feel off, and I was uneasy. I found myself downstairs watching the band play and really noticing the strangers. The shoes of the women had curled toes, and their dresses were brushing the floor with long, dragging sleeves. The man who had been staring was still doing so, only now he was wearing a thick maroon tunic and beret with a feather. They weren't dressed in jeans and the clothes were certainly not from this time period. Suddenly, the dream morphed with me standing in the twilight of fall evening, and the wind was wicked, controlling the leaves that began whirling around me. They whirled up my legs and back down again, with no sign of stopping. It was unnerving, like they were trying to take me somewhere, while I stood motionless, unable to move, unable to run. Then that primal need for flight kicked in with desperation, and I had to get them off me. I had a horrible feeling as I ran. The leaves pushed back against me and seemed to prevent me from getting anywhere. We've all had those dreams where we're walking and walking and walking, and our destination keeps getting farther away. That's what it was like. Abruptly, I heard a sound like flames crackling, and I swear I smelled smoke. The weird, encroaching wind screeched. Then I was out of the woods and saw the head of a figure before me, claiming every bit of my vision. It was of a creature I had never seen before. I thought it was a cross between a wolf and a goat. It seemed to have a goatee, and something was coming out of the top of its head. Sharply pointed ears, maybe. The eyes were huge, red and terrifying. There were flames behind it and they were crackling. apparition was talking but couldn't be heard above the evil sounds behind it, screams and crackling flames and screeching wind. I was certain I must wake up and wake up fast, or something very bad would happen to me. It was the scariest nightmare I have ever had, and woke up in a cold sweat. Running downstairs, I told the remainder of the party what happened. They all had a good laugh and told me I had been drunk, but I knew this wasn't true. Even Wally teased a bit, although there was a touch of concern in his eyes. He looked eerily like he was experiencing déjà vu. After my exam the next day, I got 2 calls. One was from Wally and the other from my roommate, who I also told about the dream. This was before the internet, and Wally had a book on the occult, and my friends spent the morning browsing the library. I'll never forget the stunned sound of his voice on the phone and his reluctance to tell me. Both found paintings of the devil down through the centuries. Some had a goatee and decided the ears I couldn't describe were probably actually horns. When shown the pictures, I was overwhelmed with a feeling of doom. That's the only way I can describe it. Wally's roommates stopped teasing me and shared a few crazy dreams of their own. None were like mine, though. I never found out who those strangers were that night. Would they have something to do with my dream, with the horrible images I saw? I couldn't bring myself to visit the farm again. My daughter was 7 years old when she discovered her uncle on the living room sofa, dead from a drug overdose. The death was ruled that he ended his own life, but there's still a lot of questions that will never be answered. He was 27, in perfect health, showed no warning signs, but most of all, none of us believed that he would ever do such a thing if there was the slightest chance his niece would discover him. He adored her from the moment she was born, and I can't imagine he would ever want to cause her such an emotional trauma. There were a lot of circumstances that point to the fact that he didn't end his life, that someone else would be happy to have him out of the way. We suspect one person in particular, but this isn't the place to discuss that, especially with no proof. On the night following his funeral, which wasn't held for 10 days after his death because they took so long to do the autopsy, my daughter woke in the middle of the night and told me Uncle Dusty was in her room and wanted to talk to me. I followed her across the hall to find an empty room lit only by her Tinkerbell nightlight. She wasn't a bit frightened and was more puzzled that he was nowhere in sight, and claimed that he came out of her closet, but the door opening was what woke her up. The closet door was still open, as a matter of fact. She said that he kept pointing towards his temple, then pointing across the hall to the room, which is why she assumed he wanted her to go get me. But the oddest thing was that she said he was talking the entire time, but she couldn't hear a word he was saying. His mouth was moving like he was speaking quickly, but she heard nothing. I dismissed it as a little girl's bad dream after such a terrible experience, especially seeing how we had buried him that very day. It was bound to be on her mind. Heck, an adult would have had a hard time coping, much less a little girl. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and I was heading to the kitchen around 1 or 2 a.m. for a glass of water. I drank my water and walked down the hall to return to bed, and as I passed her room opposite mine, I glanced in out of habit and froze in my tracks. I saw Uncle Dusty standing at her bedside. I was wide awake and knew what I was seeing. I saw him in detailed profile right down to the baseball cap he always wore. He was standing with one hand on his heart and the other on her forehead, while she was sound asleep. Here's what's so strange, though, and I never heard anyone experience such a thing. He seemed to be made of swirling glitter. He was emitting his own light and his entire body was shimmering. I was stunned and, as I stood there, he never moved, never looked at me or acknowledged me in any way. I backed away after a few minutes and went back to my own bed. It might sound silly to some, but I kind of felt I was intruding on a private moment with his beloved niece. No other major events occurred until 9 years later, when my daughter, then 16, was diagnosed with a large tumor that had already taken over much of her liver. Of course, it had to be removed immediately. So after she was recovering from an emergency 6-hour surgery at her local children's hospital, I took a walk a few blocks away from the hospital property to smoke a cigarette because, as we know, smoking near a hospital is a no-no. It was quite late at night in a fairly large city, so I was a bit apprehensive being out alone, seeing as how I'm a small female and an easy target for anyone looking to cause trouble. I'm sitting on a bench puffing away when I see a tall, thin man wearing a baseball cap standing motionless across the street, just watching me. His face was in shadow, so I couldn't see him clearly, but oddly enough, I felt no sense of menace. I finish my smoke and begin walking back, and he falls into step behind me, keeping far enough away that I still can't make out his features. As I reach the entrance to the hospital, I look back, and he's gone, nowhere to be seen. He couldn't have disappeared that quickly. Upon reaching my daughter's room, the first thing she said when she awoke was that Uncle Dusty came to see her in a dream. Then it struck me that maybe, just maybe, he was watching over me as I took my midnight stroll to make sure no one came to harm me, alone at night in the middle of the city. Now the latest visit also comes at a special time. My daughter is now expecting her own baby. Called me this morning in tears and said that she was in the bathroom doing her usual business, washing her face, brushing her teeth, and so on, and said that as she straightened up from the sink, she saw behind her in the mirror her Uncle Dusty, just for a split second over her shoulder. She said he was smiling from ear to ear, but by the time she spun around, he was gone. This last experience happened just this morning, so I decided to share it. If you're enjoying this video, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and we'll dive deeper into the unknown. In 2017, my family moved to an older house. It was in rough shape, but the landlord promised to fix it up. We didn't have a lot of money, and it was in our budget, so we took it out of desperation. The house was sat on a hill by itself, fenced in with a huge hill and clubhouse. Each room only had 1 or 2 wall lights and none from the ceiling. Strange things started happening shortly after we moved in. First, my kids discovered multiple angel figurines in a circle inside the clubhouse. It was odd, but I chalked it up to the previous tenants' kids doing weird stuff. The basement to the house was weird. We had to walk around the outside of the house along the side porch to a small door that led to the basement. The basement was basically like someone had dug underneath the house and had no floor or lights. Just a person-sized space where you could walk around about 100 feet in front, and that's it. When my teenage daughter and myself went to have a look inside, there was old funeral flowers and arrangements. Shortly after moving in, a heaviness set in. The air was always heavy and filled with dread. My once happy family went into depression and not speaking. My marriage started to suffer. It felt like no matter what, we couldn't be happy while inside. We had 4 dogs, a German Shepherd, a Pit Bull, Chihuahua, and a Terrier mix. All 4 dogs followed me wherever I went and made a circle around my feet. If I went to the kitchen, they were there. The dining room, eating, the dogs lay at my feet. Even if I went to the bathroom, the dogs would make a circle around me in the toilet. They stood at my side and refused to move. Then the electrical problems started. We would hear zaps and buzzing coming from the breaker box, multiple calls to the landlord. She would send someone out to fix it, but that didn't last very long. We had to leave one weekend because the problem was so bad, my husband feared we were going to die in an electrical fire. Around Christmas time, my oldest son ran into the bedroom scared and crying because he saw a lady in a nightgown staring at him through the living room window. My husband and I checked the entire property, but found no woman or any evidence of her. A few months before my family moved, I started having nightmares. I would dream of setting the house on fire and dying with it, just sitting on the bed while the flames burnt me. I couldn't sleep at night because of them. My husband started having the same thoughts, and we both just wanted to die in the house. My father-in-law started having hallucinations. He would scream that the rooms were on fire. He would watch a funeral take place in our front yard when there wasn't one. He would talk to himself and poured bleach in a pot of soup beans that I was cooking. It got so bad, I took all the knives and hid them in my purse while myself, my husband, and our 4 kids slept in one bedroom with the door locked, scared of him. We honestly believed that he was going to kill us. Every passing day, things were getting worse. The idea of ending my own life grew stronger, and finally, we couldn't take it. We found a new place to rent, and walking away from that house was like a weight lifting. Every step got easier to breathe, and I started to smile more. A few of the old neighbors contacted us and said that the house was on fire, and the picture was taken from the back bedroom, my children's room where the breaker box was. No one set the fire and no one was living in it. I truly believe that house was evil and wanted to burn. Since moving, my dogs no longer surround me. My marriage is improved and my father-in-law no longer has hallucinations. My husband and I met in college. I won't name names for the sake of privacy, but we went to one of our region's oldest colleges, over 200 years old, and it is known to be very haunted. We started dating our freshman year, and we pretty much started living together right away. I was a commuter, so I would stay over in his dorm often. In our junior year, my husband, boyfriend at the time, Jay, landed a sweet living school situation where he was able to have a bedroom to himself in a larger suite with only 2 guys suite mates. This was the ideal situation for us because it meant I could basically live with him during the school years since he didn't have a person sharing a bedroom with him. This living situation was obviously incredibly beneficial for me, and I loved it. Aside from having to share a twin XL bed with a 6'2", 250-pound linebacker, it was pretty awesome. It didn't take me long at all to realize how haunted the building was. I have a ton of stories about my experiences in the building and on the campus in general, but explaining them all in this post would be way too long. Jay was a resident assistant and had a lot of work to prepare the suites for all the other students who would be moving in soon. Because of this, he was able to move in a week before anyone else. On the day that we were moving Jay's things into the building, I had multiple sightings of a tall, black, shadowy figure. I would always catch it out of the corner of my eye, and it would quickly dart out of sight every time I did a double take or tried to look at it more closely. I saw this figure probably 4 or 5 times on move-in day and didn't think much of it until remembering that the building was basically empty, except for Jay and me. Other experiences included hearing voices, hearing scratching, banging, thumping, at times when it could not be explained. A very creepy night alone on campus during a holiday break when a major storm hit and all of the power went out and more. We had a lot of creepy experiences, but my least favorite part of living in this building was honestly just the feeling I got being there alone. If I was ever alone in any part of the room, I immediately would feel a presence enter the space I was in. It felt intense and loud and scary. The best way I can explain it is that it felt like someone was standing beside me and screaming in my face. There was no sound. We lived with this weird presence the entire time we were in the building, and we honestly were fine for months. But then something weird started happening. Jay would start waking up in the middle of the night by speaking a different language. I know saying speaking in tongues sounds ridiculous, but I honestly don't know how else to describe it. I swear he sounded like he was speaking a foreign language, but it was a language that I couldn't identify and had never heard before. He always sounded really intense and had an almost aggressive tone to his garbled words, whatever he was saying. He woke me up by talking in his sleep like this every night for months. It creeped me out, but I never said anything about it until one night. It scared me so terribly that I had no other choice. I woke up one night to find Jay on top of me. Remember, we shared a twin XL bed and he's a huge guy. I was on my back and he was straddling me with his palms flat on the bed on either side of my head. His eyes were wide open and he was bent down and staring right into my face. I was immediately spooked, but played it off by saying something like, hi babe, you good? Is everything okay? No response. Jay continued to stare through me and didn't move. I kept this up for a minute or two, thinking he was potentially just being silly or was groggy from sleep and couldn't form his words. We stayed like that for what felt like forever. He then got off of me, climbed over to get out of bed, and stood still in the room for a few seconds. After that, he turned sharply to look at the desk and chair in the bedroom. He pulled the chair out from the desk, turned it around 180 degrees so that it was facing him, walked around the chair 3 times in a circle, and then stood back to face the chair directly. He stood staring at the seat of the chair for about a minute, then got back into bed with me and went immediately to sleep. The entire time this was happening, I was watching with my mouth wide open. I know that I tried to call to him, get his attention a few times to see what he was doing, but at a certain point, all I could do was watch in bewilderment. This was the strangest thing that ever happened to me. I told Jay all about it and what he did the next morning, and he was very upset because it scared him so badly. He is not and has never been a sleepwalker or a sleep talker. Shortly after this event, I decided to cleanse the place with some help from a friend. We did, and things got really quieted down afterwards. Jay continued to talk in his sleep every now and again for the rest of the school year, and even here and there for the next school year. We had been married and living in our own place since we graduated almost 2 years ago, and I haven't heard Jay sleep talk or seen him sleepwalk a single time since we left living on campus. I know that building was haunted, and I really believe that whatever it was attached to Jay for some reason and tried to speak through him.